Mahalo, mahalo. Thank you so much. Aloha, everyone. My name is Andrea Nandoskar, and I'm the Education Program Manager at Historic Hawaii Foundation. Thank you for joining us today for Nature and Culture Connection, Indigenous Solutions to Climate Change. A big mahalo to our event partners, Makalea Ane, the Resilience Officer for the County of Maui Mayor's Office on Climate Change, Resilience and Sustainability, and Alana Yurkanen, Project Manager for the Nature Conservancy's Maui Marine. A special mahalo to Kamuela Enos, the Director of the Office of Indigenous Innovation for the University of Hawaii System, who will provide the opening framework for our conversation today. And mahalo nui loa to our project presenters who are taking time out from their work in the field to be here today, and to the organizations that they represent. Just a note that we are recording as well as live streaming today's presentation, and the replay will be available immediately after this event on the HHF YouTube channel and Facebook platform. The replay and any resources referenced today will be available on the event webpage on the HHF website by next week. Should you have questions throughout, please type them in the chat. We'll collect them and we will have time at the end. There will be a discussion with the panelists and Q&A from the audience. For those new to Historic Hawaii Foundation, we are a statewide nonprofit that helps people save historic places. That includes built and cultural sites. These are sites that tell the many stories, mo'olelo, of the multi-layered history of Hawaii. We do this through education, advocacy, assistance, and protection of and for historic places. I would now like to introduce Makalea Ane formally, who will moderate today's conversation. Makalea's role as the Resilience Officer for the County of Maui Mayor's Office, as I mentioned, of Climate Change, Resilience, and Sustainability, makes her the point person for all environmental issues within Maui County. She brings together a wide array of stakeholders to learn about the county's challenges and build support for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience initiatives. Makalea aspires to incorporate her interest in traditional ecological knowledge to facilitate the cooperation of government agencies with Native peoples. Welcome, Makalea. She will be our moderator.
Hey, aloha, mahalo for joining us today. Wau o Shana Makalea Dudwa Ane no Mililani Oahu Mayau o Kahului Maui Noho Ana o Resilience Officer, Mayor's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resilience. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo to Kamuela and Pomaikai, and I think that was Kainoa that did the punny chicken skin. Cool. So I hope that helped to settle us into this space and prepare us for the journey that we're about to begin. So thank you for taking your time out of your day to join us. The presentation that we've put together for you is to really dive deep into Indigenous solutions to climate change, the impacts of climate on these Indigenous solutions, and how can we all integrate that into policy and planning. And I really want to as we think about climate change, it's really hard being on an island to be like, how can we really affect climate change and really change it and make a positive impact? And hopefully today you can see that, you know, all of us working together can make a difference. And if our goal is resilience as a community, resilience, and, you know, helping each other adapt to the really rapid changing pace of climate change. I think if we look at resilience as something we can work towards, I think it's easier for us to find solutions in nature-based solutions and traditional ecological knowledge. And so when we look at promoting and investing in nature-based solutions, indigenous solutions, they're holistic systems. They're not just one BMP that we put into place to catch sediment and protect our reefs. That sediment retention basin can't pivot during COVID to provide resources for our people. So if we invest in people, if we invest in fish ponds and lo'i, all the people you see here today can make that pivot, can address many other issues besides just sea level rise or intense fires and drought. And so you'll see all of these projects able to, you know, work holistically and provide other major resources for our community. So we have, you know, ecological services, wetland restoration is huge, and fish pond restoration, providing food for our people. So mahalo for joining us, and hopefully you're prepared for our journey. So the first presenter today is Kamuela Enos, and he is going to be kind of setting up the framework of how we can look at integrating this into planning and policy, and kind of just get us centered and give us a framework for today. So as Andrea mentioned, Kamuela Enos is the director of the Office of Indigenous Innovation for the University of Hawaii System. His work focuses on repositioning ancestral practice as contemporary innovation. Born and raised in Waianae, Oahu, Kamuela comes from a family of cultural practitioners. I mean, sure, everybody, his reputation precedes him. He's amazing. But his, family of cultural practitioners and farmers committed to sustainable agriculture, a vocal advocate for innovative educational approaches that serve all learners. Kamuela has turned his challenged secondary educational experience into a successful post-secondary academic career. Oh, now you like school, huh? Kamuela has an undergraduate degree in Hawaiian Studies and an MA in Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Hawaii. At Manoa, Kamuela previously served as the Director of Social Enterprise at Ma'u Farms, of course, a community-run nonprofit that aims to connect Waianae youth to the land while fostering them into the workforce and providing life skills. So mahalo, Kamuela, thank you, and take it away.
Mahalo nui e makalea e mahalo nui pakahi apau. I really want to start to say that I am assuming that I'm speaking to fellow practitioners and peers, so I ask the permission to talk about the work, but in no ways do I ever hope to seem that I am lecturing or being didactic or telling people what the work should be like, but just more a conversation of peers. If we can get my presentation, if we can advance this slide. What I wanted to just ground this conversation in is how do we talk about restoring Indigenous agency and Indigenous practice, not as a form in ways that it's understood as the most logical and practical thing to do by all parties, and not just out of a sense of virtue signaling, or we want to do right by a bunch of these poor people that we've been pushed to the periphery. I think the more we can stand in our mana and stand in the strength of our practice in contemporary times, I think the more it allows us to move in. So like, what are the ways to think about it that provide leverage? And I've been thinking a lot about what would look like if we, instead of having Indigenous informed approaches, we have Indigenous centered, to put the locus of power to back into communities of practice from the perspective of these communities of practice represent hundreds, if not thousands of years of R&D and how to live in very hyper-localized systems that are optimized for abundance. And I was really lucky to be a child raised with a father that had zero work-life boundaries. So we're up in the back of Waianae Valley in Lo'ikalo, that kūpuna generations before us, like hundreds of years before I created. And that was my actual classroom. And these are things I think really allow us a platform to center how are we using our practices, not as a retreat from the world around us, but to arm us to enter the world on our terms. The first thing I think is important for almost all to set up the conversations to follow is that for our ancestors, our ecology was our economy. And quite often the way we have to tackle this in contemporary society, it's like, well, this cost benefit analysis between jobs and environment, and then more than that, spirituality, like how do you've separated these things into different places, and there's heartache about how to merge them. When we understand our ancestral systems, as Nicola Kame'elehiva said in her book, Native Land and Foreign Desires, the land and people weren't means to capital, but the land and people were capital. So therefore, decision-making by the chiefs saw the people of the land, and the land really understood the people taking care of your fish ponds or taking care of your local lo'ikalo. They were economists, and they were managing an endowment that future generations had the right to. So this provides us a really powerful insight into these hard conversations about what are the trade-offs, but allows us to be in this space because we have these things intrinsically woven into our practices. Next slide. Important thing to think about is at the scale, the large scale, and how our ancestors lived. We were self-sufficient not only on valleys, on islands, but in valleys. I think it's really important to ground our conversations in truths that no one can argue. No one can argue that our ancestors are self-sufficient on the most finite biosystem on the face of the earth. No one can argue that they were also self-sufficient in their valleys, and the valleys represented hyper-localized economies and ecologies that were managed by a set of families. So if we understand the larger framework of management, where economy was our ecology, then at the individual level in each valley, we have to really understand that our family unit was the means by which action happened, by which work was done. And within the family unit, your family member was also your employer and your educator and your spiritual leader. Not only that, but what I think is important in conversations about environment, not only was everybody in the valley your family, the valley itself was your family. And this was an important thing to recognize when we treat our education and our employment strategies as interrelations between families versus bosses and employees, or jobs and environment. We see this whole thing interconnected. It provides a really important starting point to think about how we strategize. When it comes to climate change, what's really important for us, climate was a deified form of our ancestors. Like we could commune with our living environment. It wasn't a set of inert principles. We had the ability to be in relationship and communion with our environment. And therefore, you see a lot of the challenges happening right now is coming because we have really dangerous assumptions about what the environment is to us and what it isn't. It's a thing that we extract from and we pull things from, not that it's a living system. And indigeneity allows us to have the language to talk about that. The next slide. What is also important to note about how, from a truth that we can hold on to as people of Hawaii Kanaka, is that when our systems was severed, when we were severed from our systems, we had hundreds, if not thousands of years as we migrated across the Pacific and being in this deep and intrinsic relationship with the landscape. So we had created a symbiosis. The severing of that system has created challenges in our ecology and challenges in our society. People are hurting and the landscape is hurting. And there's always a rush to try to heal these fractures, but we're trying to fix them in silos. And we make the argument that you can't fix ecological issues without the people. And you can't fix social issues without connection to our landscape. Because we understood when our traditional practices were removed from us, it was replaced with poverty, systems of scarcity, because our systems are optimized for abundance. These new systems weren't optimized for scarcity. They create scarcity so things can have value. And when we try to solve the external manifestations of this illness without solving the root causes, then we waste a lot of money and time. So we can understand, therefore, how we can enter seeing our poverty as recent and learned behaviors. Hawaiians were never poor in pre-contact society. We had wealth and we were wealth creators and we generated abundance. Our new system has blockages to that because we have blockages to connection to land and practice. But we have now an opportunity to re-understand our work, is to restore our food systems as the intervention to address climate and social needs. Next slide. I'll give an example, if we could just move it to the next slide, of what we can look at as a model, or just a way to think about it. This was a project I did with a Lo'ikalo practitioner in Aiea, Kalawa, with Anthony DeLuz. There's a Lo'ikalo, he has 2.5 acres on a KS license in the back of Sunita Watercress. And we had been working with them when I was at University of Hawaii, learning a graduate class in community-based planning, to ask the question, what are all the billable services a traditional practice can be providing an urban community? And we ran the students who were in the class through a process of learning how to listen, how to enter, how to work with people who are doing a practice, not as people who are helpless and need help, versus people who are incredibly competent and capable in a science that the rest of society has yet to learn. And how do you help them bridge that, with the outcome being they're able to recenter themselves in the space of agency and allowing themselves to make decisions on behalf of what is needed for their community and their organization because they're being productive. And when we ran these students, and this was a slide done by two students in the class, Nigel Rosette and Cole Hendrickson, we began to identify what are all the discrete services a Lo'ikalo could be providing an urban community. And we were really excited because then it allows us to shift mental models, to shift this mindset of, oh man, we're struggling and we don't have enough, to like, no, we're producing and we can start billing people. How do we get the systems to understand the value of what's happening, and how do we set our communities up with the capacity to be entering the systems on their own terms? Next slide, please. I'm pulling this really quickly from my strategic plan in the office, but the basic principle of these next 3 slides was important for us to be grounded in the work of the Office of Indigenous Innovation. Is the first understanding is that in pre-contact society, the role of government was supporting community agency and supporting communities across the Pai'aina to be productive in their own watershed. And therefore, everything around government was designed to allow the flow of power to communities to be productive. And that was what the chiefs were gauged on. You couldn't have a chief who was presiding over starving people because you promptly had an ex-chief. So there was a lot of really important work that was, society was designed to be supportive of this type of work. Next slide. When external forces came in, it severed these relationships. So therefore, decision-making was removed from community, and the community was then relegated to conditions of poverty. The model that supplanted our model of our kūpuna was one that was primarily extractive, and was taking stuff from Hawaii to then participate as a part of a global supply chain in exchange for money that we then purchased goods and services, often from abroad. So we saw really clearly, and I'm painting with a broad brush, but I think this is kind of true, resource depletion and poverty as what happened because of this external imposition of a different system into our islands. In the last slide. What we hope to do now is to restore what used to be, where we can be setting up our researchers as allies and our communities as experts, so that we can restore agency back to our community by having them show the efficacy and viability of their practice in solving issues not just important to our community, but issues important to global society. We'll make the case that we can start to research what is the carbon sequestration potential of indigenous management of our watersheds. What is the way that we can feed communities with the lean proteins from our ocean, as also mitigating sea level rise? Like all of these different solutions that can be coming from our kūpuna, because how we understand innovation to me is restoration. You restore the things that used to be here in contemporary ways, and we have society working with the university to affirm this knowledge, to be able to impact policy decisions, funding decisions, and so forth. So this is a real key thing we want to be focusing on, and I think it's central to today's conversation. And the last slide. Well, quickly, this is how the office operates between networks, but I want to go to the slide after this because I'm running short on time. We see this work can only be done with intention, and we use the metaphor of the peva, which is that butterfly-shaped wedge that was used to fix fractures in our umeke, and our umeke, or bowls, were designed to hold wealth. When it's fractured, it can no longer hold wealth, and everyone starves. So we wanted to look at what is a way we can understand equitable engagement of Indigenous communities to restore these practices, to create the solutions necessary for adapting to climate change. The first is equity. There has to be a willingness on all sides to talk about the nature of the fracture. We have to be really clear. Hawaiians are just fine, and none of us really wanted to have our systems removed from us. We can't act like we're happy for it. We have to be clearly talking about what happened that removed us from the system. Because if you want to fix a crack, you have to understand how it cracked. You have to understand, was this crack from being dropped? Was it misuse? Was it wear and tear? Was it just the nature of the wood? We have to understand the nature of the fracture. So we have to be willing to have hard conversations. The second part of what is vital for us to address is reciprocity. If you want a crack to stay cinched, both sides have to be held strong. And you have to have a willingness to build interventions to address the reasons for the fracture and a design to hold each side equal. This shows up really clearly in power sharing, in designing from the beginning versus being asked to come in at the end. It will show up in budgets and how people are, you're matching what you're saying in public to how your budgets are spending that and investing in communities of practice. And that's why it's really important to note that many Kanaka or Kanaka allies who are from Hawaii have cultivated dual fluencies. Because we're forced to go to college, we understand the system and we know a bad deal when we see one. So how do we be at the table to make sure that investment is happening so that we can heal the crack and we can provide the resources for things to be sustained? And the final part of the work I think is really vital is transparency. The PEVA, when it's done, adds beauty to something that was once fractured. It allows you to know that this is now strong. We did our best to fix it and we're not hiding it. So you have to be transparent the whole way you're doing it. And when it's done, you have to show that we fixed this. This is now held together to the will of all of us. So it provides a space for us to address these historical issues so we can stand in strength to fix something that's upon us that is bigger than any one of us. But ultimately is something that is created because of attitudes. So it has to be fixed because of attitudes. And I'll just close. What was really important in the role of indigeneity, Indigenous-centered approaches to all of this is that like this maxim from Einstein, that the mindset that created a problem cannot be the mindset that fixes. When we bring and we center on Indigenous solutions, we're tapping into thousands of years of deep science and deep technologies of how to live in place. We're bringing that to the corpus of knowledge we can all pull on to have solutions. And in addressing it, we're also healing the outputs of the fracture, we're healing our ecology and our economy, and having it centered in our communities who were once experts, marginalized, and now moving back to expertise to center on community agency. So that was a lot. That was a fire hose, but I really appreciate that everyone speaking after me are incredible experts, are incredible scientists, are incredible entrepreneurs, but in this way that their ancestry lives through them, and they are remanifesting the mana of the kūpuna in contemporary times. So mahalo for letting me open.
Well, that was beautiful, Kamuela. Wow, that was a lot. Every time I had a question, and then you like answered it right away. But I really enjoyed how you really emphasized that ecology is our economy, that we were based and our wealth was based on our natural resources. And I think a few of our presenters are going to talk about vai, or water twice. And if you had water, you could provide food for your people. And if you say it twice, vai, that was how we measured wealth. And so really bringing that back to center it and have saying it in English terms and Western science terms, and saying ecology is our economy. really like focusing, I really enjoyed listening to you talk about that people are the center of our wealth and our connection. Like, I think I worked for Pauleke a couple years ago, and he always, made sure that even though we were doing conservation, it wasn't about protecting the upper watersheds. It was about bringing the people to Aina and connecting to Aina, and making sure that we had that sense of kuleana to make sure that we took care of this place. So yeah, you touched upon many, many things. So mahalo for that, for centering us. And can you talk a little bit more about, or just like a couple of sentences maybe, so when we talk about climate change, like the buzzword now is equity. And your last slide had 3 things. It had equity, reciprocity, and transparency. Either maybe touch one more point about like a big takeaway on for the people in the audience around like maybe what you feel like equity is missing in our system right now, or maybe something that you want us to make sure that we address, like make sure we don't forget moving forward as we plan for climate change, as we plan for climate mitigation in our work.
Mahalo. And makala'a. I think what's really important is this idea of equity. Is there's going to be a big rush for things Indigenous, and it's already happening now, and I'm seeing it because I'm situated within the research arm of the university. We want to be really clear. It's a package deal. You've got to take the community with the knowledge, and that is really critical, that the community, quote unquote, is at the table in deal making. And that is the root of equity. It is the root of, that's pono to me in English. And it is a sense of like, it's not saying, oh, put in here, we'll give you a slice of 0.5% of our annual operating budget and a role on our advisory commission, and we'll let you do the opening chats. That's not equity. Pardon my French, that's complete and utter bullshit, and that's degrading. But we have to develop the capacity to be at the table, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, as the saying goes. So equity is the willingness to be patient and to adopt a patient investment framework that we will grow together in time. Equity is for everyone to see their fates as intrinsically linked. Like no one's getting out of this alive. We need to be figuring out, this is all hands on deck time. But how do we set up the arrangements where we can stand in mana with each other? We have to go through the hard things first. We cannot skip over the hard conversations, but we cannot also stay focused on solely the hard conversations, because I think the prerogative of our ancestors, I was raised by being around some incredible people now, too, especially I think a lot about Uncle Erikana and Uncle Walter Paulo, and their mana was manifested in their ability to work and provide abundance to others, not in the grievance that they had about the systems. They had plenty of grievances, but they had to make sure that their grievances was a form of correcting things so they could go back to doing their practice of abundance manifestation. So I think that is how, to me, equity is manifested. Did that answer that, Makale, or is that too esoteric?
Beautiful, yes. Yes, too esoteric, but yes, you answered my question. No. Mahalo. So for everybody in the audience, we really do want to have this be a conversation between all of us here on the panel. So panelists, please, if you ever have a question, please pop your camera on and take the floor, please. So we're gonna take you on a huaka'i across the Pai'aina, and we're gonna start on Kauai and then move down to Mokuo Kiave. So our next presenter today is Pauleke Flores. Pauleke was born in Hilo, Hawaii, and raised in Waimea, Kauai. He is a 2001 graduate of Waimea High School, so he's back on Kauai. He went to Kapiolani Community College, then transferred to UH Manoa Hawaiian Studies program with a special focus on Malama Aina. He has dedicated over 15 years of his career working on Aina-based nonprofits, and Pauleke now serves as the Kuapa coordinator, he used to serve as the Kuapa coordinator at Paipai Oheia Fish Pond in Ko'olau Poko Oahu, where his knowledge of Malama Aina practices of dry stack rock wall building was invaluable to the restoration of that sacred place. Pauleke currently works for Malama Huleia, where he's able to pass his ike on to the next generation and integrate his knowledge into restoring this Pai'aina and Wahipana of a 600-year-old Alako'o fish pond. He is experienced in traditional hale building, dry stack rock wall building, traditional foods, and restoring lo'ikalo, lo'i pa'akai, ko'a, limu, and loko i'a, and on and on and on. He's very well-rounded as a kanaka. So mahalo Pauleke for joining us from Kauai. And we look forward to hearing what you guys got going on over there. And Pauleke, I'm not sure if you are saying anything, but you're on mute, but we can see your screen. And maybe there's some internet issues, but Pauleke, your video is off and we can't hear you yet.
Makalea, it's Andrea. Let's go to Pomakai. Oh, okay, never mind. He's on. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Hi, yes.
Okay, and then can you see my screen?
Not yours. I can't see your screen. I can see the
now.
Yep, got it.
Okay, hello everybody. Aloha. Yeah, mahalo nui makaleo. Yeah, I'm Pauleke Flores, and currently today I'm going to be sharing about, our fish pond area. Right now I'm representing, working with Malama Hulia nonprofit organization on the island of Kauai in the Ahupua of Niumalu, or Namoko Puna and Ahupua of Niumalu. Right next to those of you not familiar with Kauai, right, in this back picture is the Nauwiliwili Harbor and close to the airport, so pretty central for the island. And yeah, our nonprofit is started about 2012, focusing within the Huli'ia watershed to remove invasive red mangrove that's been taking over the river and the fish pond and different resources within its estuary. And currently, at this moment, we are at Alakoko Fish Pond, or otherwise known as Menehune Fish Pond, which is about a 600-year-old fish pond and has about 26 acres of mangrove on it. Okay. So this is a quick mission and vision of our nonprofit. A vision to a free-flowing, healthy, and productive Hulia ecosystem, perpetuate community pride. And our mission is Malama Hulia advocates to educate and leads community efforts to remove red mangrove along Hulia River, reestablishing native wetland ecosystems, and create an environmental stewardship program honoring Hawaiian values. And currently, where we're at on site, the fish pond, was, as far as we could go back, was owned under the Kanoa estates and families since 1883, and slowly was passed on to or purchased by the Okada Trucking Company in the 80s till today. And right now we're going on a little, as a nonprofit, partnering with Trust for Public Land, we're trying to acquire the fish pond because it's up for sale right now. So we're hoping to, obtain acquisition to purchase the fish pond so that it could be under the nonprofit and not under another private owner that might, we don't know, but might cut off the community. But at least for us, we would know that we would be forever serving the community within this space and keeping the people attached to this area. Here's a little eye candy of, on the left side picture in the 1900s of the fish pond, and then on the right, this one is about 2017, but all the way up to 2018, going into 19, it still looked like this with the mangrove. There's about 70 acres worth of mangrove within the whole Huli'ia watershed, within the property of Alakoko Fish Pond. There's about 26 acres, and as of today, we have removed 26 acres of mangrove and started replanting native plants and getting our next moves on. So another little bigger picture to see how it was at the time in the 1900s, still productive. And then it's an aerial shot of our first half in 2018, going into 19. Got about almost half of the fish pond removed. Everything on the wall towards the bottom end of the screen where you see the dots are all hand removed mangrove, and then majority of the area going on the other upper end of the picture were removed by machine excavators. And then as of today is the most recent, removed from the start of the gate property all the way around, exposing the rest of the wall, 2,700 feet of the kūpuna, the fish pond wall, and the very top you could see the old ditch Hawai that is bringing spring water alongside the upper or the top end of the fish pond to bring fresh water to the bottom half of the pond. Yeah, so with just a visual to see where we are, what we're doing, and what we've been doing within the past. This has been going, September this year makes 3 years since we broke ground. A lot of this work has been done within the past year and a half, 2 years. And then, hope that was my last picture. So I'm gonna pop over it to another screen to show a little bit about fish ponds. So real quick, in Hawaii, we have about 6 types of fish ponds, ranging from freshwater fish ponds, up Mauka, mixed with one with lo'i'i akalo, taro patches that grew kalo deep enough to grow fish at the same time. So we had our fish employ in the same area. And it's basically like our modern day aquaponics, growing fish, using the poop, and growing lettuce, but now it can fit in our back porch. Our kūpuna is doing this in mass scale. Then going into freshwater ponds and freshwater fish traps, and make haas and kahes and haas, or catch fish within the river systems. And then going down into the brackish water system. One of the most famous technology out of the 6 different types of fish ponds is the kūpuna style fish ponds, which are based on brackish water. And it's pretty much a self-producing and self-recruiting kind of fish pond, where it makes, when all the resources are right, it can form its own food for the base of the food chain, and also use the tides and the sluice gates to harvest and recruit fish. And then there's pu'one, our number 4. It's a brackish fish ponds, or temporary fish ponds made of more sand dunes, and some are temporary, some are permanent, but also are run with brackish water, and some just seasonal salt water. And then we got our hapunapunas, our more natural ponds, which are fed with underground tubes from freshwater and saltwater, and also some that were carved through the rocks to bring surface water to. And then our umeikis, which is our fish traps, which I believe is trying to learn more is because of the lack of fresh water to make it fully abundant, but still having the resources side, we're used to trap fish during the tides versus growing and building up capacity like kuapa style fish ponds would. So right now where we're at behind me is Alakoko, and that's a kuapa style fish pond. Kind of unique. Some archaeological reports show it was local Hawaii, but when we looking at bioindicators as we walk down a pond for the first time and seeing barnacles on the wall and doing water quality testing showed that it wasn't a freshwater fish pond at all. Totally brackish. And yeah, salinity is usually above 17 parts per thousand. So just going on that, it's definitely a unique kind of regenerative system, not like as it goes out into the ocean, it's not like fish pens and fish traps that they're doing in the deep ocean. This definitely helps recruit wild population, but also help boost wild population too, and in and out. Doesn't hold food. We don't have to feed the fish in this section. Food are grown from the microscopic level into the limu level, the more hardier stage. And yeah, our main goal is to not over pollute with too much, as some of the problems are popping up with more cage pens and diseases that flow within those cage areas, and how it can pass to more of the wild population. But for us, sorry, I gotta keep my zones close back to the fish pond because it gets spread out. For fish ponds, at least through my learnings, fish ponds, real quick on fish ponds, at least for us as we're learning, is part of a bioindicator of a healthy ahupua'a system. Depends which ahupua'a you're in, but if there's a fish pond in there, especially a kuapa style fish pond, at least for here in Niumalu, because we rely on brackish water, any resources above us, up Mauka, the Lo'is and river system, we need some of those. We need that water too. So if fresh water is coming in polluted or dirty, mismanaged, we will see water quality change within the fish pond. And vice versa, we rely on the kai, the ocean waters and the high tides. Every high tides we get new salt water coming into the pond, mixing the brackish environment. And if something were to happen, makai of us and pollution or mismanagement down there, it will affect our water quality within the pond, which we can try and source and find out what's going on. So if both sides are totally balanced, we will see the outcome within the fish pond of being balanced. And then within the fish pond, well-balanced fish pond that we use as a bioindicator would be the birds. The birds would be like our last level of indicator showing that we have enough nutrients and food at the base level. So from our microorganisms and into the limu, to the fishes, the crabs, the plants, and then the birds. We have things fruitful, whether we like it or not, the birds will come because the food will be available. And we'll just have to find a balance within there. We do, at this fish pond, we have a spring that is feeding into this fish pond as a freshwater resource, and a little stream that is going around the little pool way behind me, about there. It goes around the mountain. Right now it's dried out, but there should be a ditch going right around there and feeding into 6 more little smaller systems of lo'i or lokowai, and then ultimately into the pond. So two resources. I will kind of show a little moving, what is this called? A diagram that we do with the kids to just show, where did it go? Sorry. Close my, you guys see me? Okay, sharing screen again. Everybody can see this? Thumbs up on the panel side. You can see. Okay. So it's something I like to share with the kids. We kind of formed this with our virtual curriculum during this COVID time. And it's really hard to show kids when you're standing here in the spot for them to kind of imagine all these things going on. A lot to take in, but it's a fast forward version. This is the most online. We're slowly finishing this up where it's going through our pilot program, but it starts off. Can you guys see my mouse when I'm moving? Is this work? Yeah, okay. So it starts off with some molelo, the base kanekana, and then it slowly pops up. All these bubbles pop up one at a time and telling parts of what the functions are within the local i'a. So one of our main parts is the fish pond wall itself, that long rectangle, and then it'll pop up the yellows. All the yellows are fresh waters. So there's fresh water coming up from the main Huli'i'a stream. There's fresh water coming up from this line going around to this area. There are 6 more ponds. And then up here is the spring that comes around into Hawai and brings fresh water into this half of the pond. We have, these two we call makawai. It's where the fresh water come in. And then we have 2 makaha. Makaha helps bring in the salt water and push out the brackish water. So at high tide level, more blue is coming in. That's the salt water, comes into the pond. In the meantime, 24/7, fresh water is coming in to the pond. And then it starts to mix. And then when it goes low tide, let's see if it works. I gotta close my zoom down. Okay. And it gets low tide. During that still moment, the brackish water should build up the phytoplankton, zooplankton, the main base of the pyramid of food that is the main attraction of the baby fish. And as that mixes and populates the pond on the low tide, the green arrow is where the brackish water is going out into the system as it's going towards the ocean. Any little baby fish that smells that nutrients and food swims through our gates, our makaha, and then I like to tell the kids, once they get inside, oh, you can't see it, cool. So our makaha, and then once they're in the pond, they're in the all-you-can-eat buffet Costco. I tell them they're gonna be eating, staying inside the pond. They'll swim back and forth until they're too big to actually go back out, and yeah, that's how we recruit. As one way of naturally recruiting fish into the pond. Our brackish water fish ponds are meant to grow herbivore fishes. Focusing, the most popular fishes are mullets. Depends on what island you are and depends on what fish pond, but at least for over here, the stories are bragged upon on who could grow the fattest mullet within their ponds, or the most sweet tasting mullets within their ponds. And how fruitful it was that you could stuff this makaha during the high tides. The makaha would be so full that you could step over the backs of the fish to walk across. But I tell the kids, they're like, what? Can you believe that? They're like, none of them believe in at first. I tell them, take this whole pond, cut it in half. Now imagine half of that is full of fish. And then you cut it in half one more time, so we got a quarter. Now take that quarter and fit it in the makaha. Now can you believe it? And then they start manifesting it and try to help so that they can mentally help us manifest the restoration of this pond, and we can hopefully reach that goal or that standard that our kūpuna had before within the stories. Yeah, and then when it's high tide, the salt water is coming in. The big fish in the pond wants to swim out of the pond. So they're always trying to go to the salt water. So at the makaha, we have 2 gates. You leave the outer gate down, you lift the inner gate, and as the fish swimming through, they get stuck on the outer gate, and then you shut the inner gate, and now you can pick and choose what fish you want for the day. Until, yeah, and you let the rest back in the pond as you need it. There's certain sizes that we go for. Usually you go for the ama size, we're told. and not the anai. Anai is the bigger version of the mullet. The ama is they're different stages. Sorry, wish I had the pictures of that so I could show, but because the anai, the bigger stages of the mullet are more mature and can produce more eggs and babies. So once they reach a certain size, say kapu, don't eat that one and let the big ones go when it's time to spawn. As they go out to the ocean, do their thing. In the meantime, the pond's still doing a high tide, low tide. When those babies get mature, start swimming upstream on the next low tide, they smell that next food or that food again coming out. They come through the gate, and then the next generation starts back up again. It's kind of that regenerative process as Kanaka or the Kia'i. What we have to do is maintain our walls, maintain our makaha, maintain our water flow, and vice versa, going all the way up Mauka and then all the way into the kai. Keep those balanced. We should be able to boost population again, get more food, at least within this tradition of making food. Then also, I really believe on the outside going towards the ocean, one thing is not really talked about much is when we do listen to fishermen or people talking about, oh, there's not as much fish as before. Even the stories are not like our grandparents' time where they used to see black balls and bubbles of fish in the water. But one part I feel is missing within this space besides just overfishing and climate change or water, getting warm and whatever. One is the movement of our fresh water not being, in the right spots and just being wasted. We diverted to multiple other scenarios. And the main other second one is the downfall of fish ponds. Right now recorded wise, say there's over 400 fish ponds. I believe there are more. There's a lot of freshwater fish ponds that weren't, or at least fish ponds within the river system that weren't accounted for because every flood, if those families didn't go back and fix their walls, they would have been broken and never accounted for. And within just the valley, coming Waimea, Makueli, and Hanapepe, there's a lot of stories of haas up there, freshwater traps that's been up there that's kind of counted as freshwater fish ponds. But fish ponds are like incubators. They can hold a lot of baby fish and keep feeding baby fishes, and then slowly, get to the point where big fishes are being protected to send out to spawn. Some fish ponds we're learning that might be able to spawn, depending on their water quality, the fish might be able to spawn within their fish pond. But it's all still a relearning process. And looking at it from a bigger picture, you had 400 incubators drop, is pretty quick, rapidly within 50 to 100 years. That's a big dent within the wild fish population that is pulling away from the recruitment outside with it, like the booster population in wild pop outside in the ocean, and vice versa from those baby fish to the herbivore, the omnivores and the predators, and so there's all a whole domino, basically starting from our water down into those other microscopic areas. That's kind of that in a nutshell. Hopefully not going over my time. Let me stop sharing.
Mahalo, Pauleke.
Yeah.
Well, we want to keep on hearing from you, and we have a couple questions in the chat. Really, I think just reflecting on what you were saying about the fish pond being bioindicators and really looking at all the different species in the fish pond, and it is a reflection of our wealth as a people in our Aina and how we treat our resources. So some of the questions in the chat were, focusing on fresh water, and you had said it, fresh water is important for fish ponds and also for the marine ecosystems. And being able to advocate for Mauka to Makai stream flow. I think all of us here have done that one way or another. I think to sum up a couple questions in the chat, have you seen the effects of the rapidly changing climate on your fish pond and the systems? I know there's a lot of currents that are going on and flows. Is that, I'm not sure if it's due to climate or mangrove and more human impact. But also, like, I think one of the Geraldo Farrington in the chat was asking about saltwater inundation in the fish pond. Have you looked at, how inundation is going to affect the fish pond and how are you going to have to adapt? Chip Fletcher was asking, about building up walls. Hi, or somebody in the chat was asking about like, how are you going to have to adapt our practices, your practices?
Right now, just within our fish pond community, for me on a personal level, like coming from Hawaii and being able to see the main restoration on the whole ocean side of the wall, I didn't at that time see any drastic changes yet from our section of the wall that we didn't touch. So whatever was there before we removed the mangrove, there was a certain height that we didn't touch at all, and we didn't put new rock on it. But the parts that were low, we did. So to me, that was like the original section of the wall that either, I'm not sure what year, at least 100 years before the mangrove started, still did not touch with the old coral and the old wall. So that was kind of like my indicator section. Like if I see the water start touching this height of the wall that we didn't touch, then I'll be like, okay, now we better, what we're gonna do. But for over here at this fish pond, I haven't seen the saltwater affect that, and we've been doing water quality, but I only been here 3 years. So the first 2.5, or the first year and a half, we could not see anything. We were in the thicket of mangrove, so I couldn't gauge. I could see high water coming up during the high. I would watch, okay, this week should be high tides. This week should be low tides. Within the mangrove, I'll see where the water touches dry land. But only as of this year, we could actually see the whole pond. So my kilo actually started this year with the little, whatever forest season could see. But also looking outside and other places, they work in front of salt beds to just the shoreline in front of my house. Right now, I don't see any big drastic changes, but I am trying to set up our guys and people, other kiai local we do work with to raise our wall just at least a foot in some places. If you're deep in the bay, we don't have waves coming in, so it's not really splashing. So we only did like a foot and a half maybe, and then the highest high tide, just the wind splashes are going over. But some places that have waves, oh my goodness, they have to go like 3 feet. And I cannot really tell because I'm not around the wave areas so much. So at a high tide and a wave, or is it a high tide swell during that tide that changes the scenario? So there's a lot of scenarios that Waimanalo guys been watching them. They've been trying to adapt and mold to their sea movement there and building on sand, and sand constantly moving, which erodes, erodes the foundation and rocks moves from there. So everybody has different kinds of scenarios to work with. We're here, we're just watching. One thing I can see inside here, so I'm looking at the fish pond, just about a 40-acre fish pond. Within it, the mangrove started growing land within the fish pond, and it started shrinking that pond. So now I watch the high tides. Okay, in the old pictures, the high tide was filled that whole rim. The high tides only now fill the rim when it's, the low tide filled the whole rim. Now, when it's low tide, you have almost just under 20 acres of mud flat or silt flats that the mangrove grew. So I look at that like, hey, if I had a bowl of water, and one time it was full, and then I put the rock in there, or something else solid that takes up at least that quarter of the pond, and then I try to fill it up. Now my pond is not going to have as much water. So when we get to remove this silt back to the sand level, this pond should be able to hold the amount of water that is not overflowing in certain spots that it used to. I don't know if that makes sense, but we're trying to test out all of these that it looks like. Right now, it's not looking to me within this spot like it's drastically changing, like, oh, we got to do something this year. And I had some conversation with you guys telling me like, oh, why you only go 1 foot? Don't you want to go like 5 feet there? I'm like, in a way, not really, because that's a lot of resources, time and money that we don't have right now. So we can do what we need to do now, and I could keep, and we are relearning a lot of stuff. So teaching our next generation how to do this. So when I'm okay, I know my kids can fix this wall too. And if they need to adapt, they adapt then, and not have to overburden themselves with projections that we didn't really even see happening yet. like physically on the site. I'm not saying nothing is not happening, but just the resources. It's hard to move, an extra mile worth of rock if you don't need to. But we just go with the beat and try to keep the younger generation starting to learn dry stacking, helpful kilo, helpful look at your water quality stuff, so they can kind of foresee the change right there on the spot. Hope we covered some of your questions. Sorry.
Well, talking about time, resources, and money, one of the questions in the chat was talking about managed retreat, and maybe this being another form of land theft. But I feel like your project here is a good inspiration on maybe how we can reclaim those lands. And it's amazing to hear that a fish pond is up for sale. But mahalo for putting a team together to try and purchase that land, even though it should be a public trust. So maybe just really quickly let us know how we can either kokua your efforts, donate, or support if you're going to the Legacy Land Conservation Program, or how are you fundraising and how we can support your efforts.
Right now, Google Malamahuli'ia.org, can go to our website. We're trying to keep it in our newsletter. Like ultimately, Trust for Public Land is helping lead the way for us, and we're there trying to talk to the landowners and try and help us gather funding. And we're kind of waiting and helping to do the push once that kahea is going out, kapu, whether it be private donors to just whatever kind of way we can hold this place and trust. Once we attain it, Trust Public Land would do the conservation easement and I think a couple other stipulations to make sure that we do what we said we're gonna do. And from there, right now as a nonprofit, we only had a 20-year plan. We only started off with a 20-year lease with a Okata trucking company, so we didn't project too far, but just remove the mangrove, stabilize the wall, and see what the next stewards can do. But now with this opportunity, it really opened the door wide to go into the next 800 years. And we can get this, we can go far and try and really rebuild this system up and be an example, at least for Kauai and the other islands too. If we can get this, when we get this fish pond up and running, there should be no excuse for the rest of our fish ponds to start growing, because this is the big one, the biggest one on our island. So anything else shouldn't have an excuse after that. We'll see. But that's the hope with the motivation. And the side stuff, Nikolai with the ama, we've been noticing our first little black ball pua ama that we're swimming in the makaha with our little nice confirmation sign that, okay, the water is flowing. We did not see that within the past year and a half of the pua amas getting a kind. Plenty invasive stuff, but pua amas fluttering in the circle is a good little indicator for us. Just last week, a week and a half ago, yeah.
Mahalo, Pauleke. We could talk all day. So the next, we're gonna jump to Maui Island and go up to Pu'ukukui with Pu'umaika'i Kaniopio Crozier and his crew at Pu'ukukui Watershed Preserve. And for the sake of time, I'll let the speakers kind of introduce themselves and their projects. So Pu'umaika'i, if you're there, we're gonna start with a 3-minute video and take you up to the top of Pu'ukukui and go and see all of the pristine places that he protects up on the top of Mauna Kahalai.
Sorry, one sec.
So while you guys get that video ready, I just wanted to talk to Chip's question about managed retreat, and if there's policy people out there and planners to really look at our natural resources and cultural resources during your planning process, and have set-asides, have conservation easements built into your plans and programs. And maybe as a planner, you have to advise your client, maybe it's not a good thing to build in a wetland. So we all live here and we're all a part of our community. So we have to make those hard conversations to protect our resources. So go for it, Andrea.
ka vai elele I mai ka lani mai ho ike mai I ka nani ka maha ho a ke akua e aku ule o kono e komo e malama e.
In this holi, the summit of Pu'ukukui is described as a momi, a gem that's hidden high above Mauna Kahalavai on Maui's west side. Pu'ukukui Watershed Preserve is the largest private nature preserve in the state of Hawaii and is home to hundreds of native species and some of the rarest endangered flora and fauna in the islands. Sprawling across more than 9,000 pristine acres from Mauka to Makai, it is a vital water source for Maui's communities, being one of the wettest spots on Earth. Hawaiian ancestral wisdom, or ike kūpuna, as it relates to water, is fundamental to the conservation efforts in the preserve, providing a culturally sensitive and culturally informed approach to managing, protecting, and restoring the thriving native ecosystem of Pu'ukukui. Our kūpuna recognized vai, water, as life-sustaining, so much so that the word vai is defined as rich, wealthy, and valuable, thus reminding us of the high value our elders placed on this priceless resource. A narrow wooden boardwalk throughout the preserve provides scientists and conservationists access to research and maintain the preserve, especially one of Pu'ukukui's, and indeed Hawaii's, most unique plant communities, the peat bog, which stretches across several miles of the summit. Plants that grow there are virtually miniaturized. Ohia trees, which can typically grow as tall as 50 to 70 feet, reach maturity at less than 1 foot in height after several decades of growth in the bog. A slip of the foot off the boardwalk can take centuries to repair its damage. Pu'ukukui is a fragile and biodiverse ecosystem, requiring a unique and intentional approach to ensure that it will remain intact for generations to come. Because, as it's been said, we are only borrowing this precious resource from our keiki.
Aloha Pauleke, are you there? We see a beautiful ohia lehua. So maybe he's having some technical difficulties. He's up at the Mauna at Pu'ukukui. So maybe we'll go on to our next presenter and go back to Pauleke and his crew when they're ready. So our next presentation is going to be Kehau Springer and Uncle Mac Poi Poi. There's a video that Uncle Mac and Kehau put together for us to watch since he's out in the field, and we heard he's zoomed out because everybody wants to know what Uncle Mac is thinking and all those little things that he's been kiloing in Molokai. So Kehau Springer is a Hawaiian born and raised in the surf of Kalehua Wehe in Kaimuki, Oahu, and she's helped Uncle Mac for several years now. She's currently with CI Hawaii's flagship program, the Wai'a Ohana campus, and Mohala na Konohiki. And so she's gonna help us huaka'i to Molokai and see what Uncle Mac's up to. So I think, Andrea, if you can
I'm going to show the video.
Yes.
Okay, bear with me. Thank you.
I want to introduce the person who has been working closely with me for many years, Kiao Springer, and also Ulu Ching, who oversees many of the projects we've worked on. Today we're going to talk about Kanaka science, which is indigenous Kanaka knowledge. So what we recognize today is that change is happening. Basically, how do we adapt to these changes? We adapt by paying close attention to details, which are the changes that occur, that is happening. Our observations and data collection need to be consistent. Part of what we can do is support our Hawaiian-wide understanding of fish spawning cycles and the effects of climate change on these spawning cycles. Participation from communities all over the state can make a difference, where we can all share information that is relevant to what we are experiencing. The most critical piece of this understanding is time. And time can be seasonal, can be monthly, can be daily, can be anytime. We also recognize that location is important in our studies because fish don't stay in the same spot. And we need to understand their habits and behavior. So now we get into an actual case study we've been conducting for many years, which is about the moai fish. So to understand the spawning cycle and a fish behavior is to know time, when the spawning is happening. So we recognize as indigenous people that the moai goes through different growth and reproductive stages. They also go through a sex change phase that plays a critical role in management of the species. These are the stages in order. It starts with the moili'i, which are the fingerlings, then the mana moi, which are the mature males. Following is the pala moi, where they turn hermaphrodite, and finally the adult female. So that is the 4 growth stages that we recognize. Gonads tell us the spawning time of the fish. And on the next slide, you're going to see some of the evidence we've collected 2 months after their normal spawning time. This extension is a very significant development. So we're questioning ourselves, is this normal or is this a mistake? Is it a random occurrence? Is it a result of climate change and global warming? So last slide showed year October 2019, where we collected females only. In October 2020, we collected not only the females, but the males too. The males pretty much validate what is occurring, evident from their milk, and the milk is their sperm. We also collected palamoi that were transitioning from male to female, suggesting that spawning is ending. Both of these dates confirm that spawning is extended past its normal time. Successful spawning requires eggs to be fertilized. People have been asking, will we have more moai from this extra spawning time? A lot of times when something doesn't happen in a normal and natural way, sometimes things can go wrong. We conducted several more studies to see if we could gather more evidence. And we did find evidence of a school of moili'i in a nursery area, possibly from the extended spawning period. Will it happen again? We don't know. We need to continue observing the patterns of fish behavior and other ocean factors that affect their change of behavior. Why do we conduct these studies? We follow the traditional practices that was set for us from our kūpuna. This is one way I can share what I know, because this is our food. We need to know how to care for our food. This is our kuleana. Our ancestors observed, questioned, and studied too. But they were malama. That's why we still have what we have today. It's up to people to follow that indigenous footprint, which was successful. Today, people take but don't give back. And they treat the resources as a commodity. What we have to remember is to malama, because when you take, you're creating one puka. So when creating a puka, you have to know how you're going to refuel that puka. So the idea we are presenting here is a way we all can learn how to refuel the puka. Mahalo for listening to our presentation.
So Kahuwai Springer is with us today, and I just wanted to have her talk a little bit about, I heard that Uncle Mac and, observations of spanning and traditional knowledge of these spawning cycles help to craft policy for our fisheries. And since we're observing changes in spawning and spawning times, government seems very hard to change policies and very rigid. And so how is that practice and reciprocity kind of playing out? Is it like government is willing to change with the different spawning seasons, or are we beating our head against the wall? What's going on? What's the story?
Yeah, and mahalo for having me. I am definitely no Uncle Mac. I'm gonna just a haumana of his, trying to cool with some of the work that he does. And I think we have so many on this panel that could answer that question, like Auntie Hannah, of course, and others. But with policy, it's challenging because we're in the system, and the state of Hawaii, DLNR manages the nearshore waters. And to go through policy changes, what I understand, there's two different routes. You go through Chapter 91, and you have to go through the BLNR, that process, public hearings and scopings, things that you want to change. And then there's also the legislature route that you could make changes. I think with this Kanaka science, indigenous knowledge, hundreds of years of Ike coming forth. This is all data. The mo'olelo, the kilo, the oli, the olelo no eao. These are our forms of data, and I think sometimes we find challenges within systems, government systems, academic systems. They want more hard numbers, quantitative type of data, and in the past, I'd say it's been disregarded and overlooked in some cases. But now we are seeing a resurgence of communities coming forth, fishers, practitioners coming forth with very articulating that and fighting for Kanaka science and these mechanisms to support changes in their rules, community-based subsistence fishing areas. To give an example, these are that's a mechanism to propose rules that are based on traditional and customary practices. So, we also seen in the legislature this year a proposed rule to allow for adaptive management techniques. We'll see what that looks like. I think it's still yet to unfold. But right now, I think we have so many Kanaka, so many advocates, allies within Hawaii that are elevating their practice to tell that story, so that we can have the firepower to make those changes, and the voices, the networks that lend each other to support one another when you want to activate, say, a rule change or petition and so forth. So I hope I answered that question. Maybe Auntie Hannah, you have more insight. I think you so ma'al to that process too. So
Mahalo for the ninau. I intend to cover that on my presentation. Let's, I think we're getting close on time, yeah? Mahalo.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't want to cut you off. Is there any other, we are, running short on time with technical difficulties and everybody talking so much and so passionately about their projects. Was there anything else you wanted to leave us with, a little nugget that, we can take and kind of mull over and think about and take into our work?
no, I think, just this is a hard times for us. We're in turbulent waters. We are navigating the best that we can. And as we go through all of this, we just gotta ealupu, come together, support one another, private partnerships, public partnerships, government, communities. We all just gotta work together to really understand, how we can support each other to come through all of this changing time. So mahalo for having Uncle Mac and myself here to speak on this. Aloha.
Mahalo. And let us know how we can kāko'o you guys in your efforts as well. So we're gonna jump back into the field with Pauleke. It looks like he's there, yup. So we saw your video already. And so now we're in your hale, it looks like. Oh, there we go.
Hey, aloha mai kako. Well, no kia kalamai for the technical difficulty earlier. Jumping right into it, mamake wa mahalo aku kapo e apau no ke kono ana mai, mahalo I na kūpuna, mahalo I kapo e nane kono, na opio, na makua, na kokako po e colleagues, nui ku mahalo ke kono ana mai. First I'd like to homai kai kia kua. When we think of climate change and we think of all of the things that is going on with what we need to address, really we have the answers. Yeah, kia kua, who created all of this, has the answers, and he passed them down to our kūpuna, to us guys. Although things are changing and evolving at an accelerated pace, we look to the strongest and the ones who overcome adversity. In our world, many of you are stakeholders and in the state, county, and different agencies, whether you maukatu makai, we know wai or water is the life source. Yeah, and I really mahalo, what Kamuela had shared, and Pauleke all the way down to the muliwai, right? You're going from the top to the bottom, and we're going to focus a little bit on the wawakua up in the uplands and that vai, that life-giving source from the time it comes up, in the ohu and the noi and dropping down, moving all the way down to where Pauleke is at the Lokoi'a. Those are the indicators, and as Pauleke was saying, we have first to kilo, and I was all intrigued. So mahalo Pauleke for just feeding me and filling my basket. When Kamuela said ecology is our economy, the challenge on the mullet and everything is like, yeah, I was getting hungry. So mahalo for that. Those bioindicators. As I hear those bioindicators and those big words, it really comes down to ue kalani ola kahoni. Yeah, that when the heavens weep, the earth lives. And I heard kūpuna share with that, and Kamuela and I, we spent many years with Anakala Erika and hear that all the time, that was something, the norm that we heard. And so our kilo, our way to observe is really, really important. And they kind of summed it all up. So I'll skip on the kilo, but kilo is that keen observations. What is the solution to kilo? Ke malo o ke kupu-kupu o ka wahine noho mauna o uka, ike mako o malo o makoko no Kahuwai Bay. Ho'omakakau Kahuwai, Ho'omakakau no Kiahi. Yeah, when we see this one wahine no Homauna fern up Mauka get dry and crispy, we know, fill your flask, get your water storage ready, get your water bottles, your huevai ready, but also to cut your fire breaks, to get ready for fire, because these indicators are telling us. You know, a lot of times we refer to the aupua, from the mountains to the sea and everything in life contained in that small package of a valley. Today we call it ridge to reef. It's a new term, sustainability, ridge to reef. All right, we're gonna hit Army Corps of Engineers, ridge to reef initiatives. Our kūpuna have been saying ahupua for 1,000 years, right? Now, what would we do if we had intellectual memory for 2,000 years? We would back up that disk drive, we put it in the cloud and have a triple backup. Well, for us, the kumulipo, okiawi kahuli vela kahonu, okiawi kahuli lole kahoni. From the time of darkness, out came light, born was the Korapala, da, da, da. We got 2,000 years of observance and kilo and indicators. There's been a lot of change. In 2,000 years, there's been a lot of change. And I think those are the solutions that we're talking about. How do we find indigenous solutions? You cannot have indigenous solutions without indigenous people. You need to look to, if I want to save Antarctica, look to the Eskimo, the Aborigine in Australia, you know, and the Hawaiian in Hawaii. These are things that is built into our culture to be resilient, that we are here and present because of our kūpuna. They were able to adapt, change, and we're that product. So we are the economy, as Kamuela was, and the me'ai and what that we produce. From way up Mauka, flowing down and coming out in the Punawai or the springs and the Wailele and the waterfalls, right? Comes the mana'o vai. The vai, water. The more water you had, the more you could sustain. And so from the time you get water to down below, I gotta think about Pauleke. I gotta think about mahiai kalo, like Kamuela. Yeah, that we're the sponge that captures up in the Wawakua. Yeah, and that real high place, that is a sponge. But it's not how much you capture. Pukui here, we average nearly 400 inches of rain, almost twice the Amazon. Yeah, but if you use it all, you're not having anything percolate down to the aquifer and come out in a punawai. It's how you malama what you capture. And so the word for law for Hawaiians is kanawai, the eco-sharing of water. The eco-sharing of water, right? That the kanawai is what we live by. And so, you know, these are things that we know, and we reestablish our lo'i systems in the valley floor. They act as micro basins, right? That you slow down sediment all the way down, they capture those nutrients. They also act as filters to purify the water, so you don't have things going down to the lokoia or onto your ko'a down below. But they also serve as fire breaks, so that fires don't run up the chute, up the chimney in the valley. Why? It's so saturated with lo'i, right? And so these are really key things that we need to do. You know, we uphold our traditions, our philosophies, our approaches, our laws, because it's proven. In our line of work, fellow colleagues and friends, we always go back to the FONSI, the FONSI, the finding of no significant impact. So if we want to look at a solution for the future, we got to go back to look at what worked. You don't go back and look at a time where things is all pilikia. You're dealing with the pilikia. The patient's trying to heal himself, as Kamuela was talking. Not possible. You got to go back to the FONSI. The FONSI is when Hawaiians took care from the top of the mountain down to the ocean, and things were good. We need to go back to move forward, you know, and the transparency that Kamuela talked about, and the i'a and the flow of the water in the muliwai is an indicator of how we take care of our wawaku and our upper watershed, that they're one system. And so, you know, it's like a helium balloon. You can pop it, or you can put a pinhole in it and watch it slowly deflate. Hopefully, we don't have either, that we take care of the whole system, Maukatumakai. So that's why we have Kanawai. And so I challenge everybody, you know, for us as Kanaka, our kilo is very important. But we always say, and mahalo to Auntie Kialani, Nana kamaka, hana kalima. That the eyes look, but the hands gotta do. Knowing is only half the battle. So when we ask Hawaiians and we ask kūpuna, what is the indigenous solutions? And we tell you, hey, you gotta take care of Maukatu Makai. Hey, you gotta do these things. Create the initiative, pass the law, put it in a budget. Don't just like, oh yeah, pretty interesting. Love that Pomaikai. All right, man. Show me some more nice pictures. I hope I never have the conversation with my mo'opuna that they don't have enough water, that they don't swim in streams, that they don't see opu run, that they don't fish. Because I was privileged to be with kūpuna, who took me by the hand, who exposed me to these things. And it's our turn. They depend on us. My kūpuna would say, hahai no kauai ka ulu la'au, that the rain follows the rainforest. We know what we gotta do. And our traditional Ike Hawaii shows us what to do. But people gotta nana kamaka, hana kalima. So whatever position you're in, I challenge you and ask you to do this for your grandchildren and the generations to follow. I'm going to stop there. I got a lot more Ike to share and a lot more mana'o, but I really want to hear on the Kekihalani, so I'll sum it up there. But mahalo no ke kono, oye wale no.
Mahalo. We keep on hearing vai come up with everybody's presentation, and yes, to connect that to our the next generations, we hope that we can pass on that vai that we make sure that there is that Maukatumakai connection so they can play in the water, so that they are vai. So with that, we're gonna move on. We have two more presenters. The next is Scott Crawford, and he is a man of many talents and always willing to help. He's executive director of the Kipahulu Ohana. He's the secretary for Namama Omu'olea. He's the president of the Farmers Market, Hana Farmers Market. So many things. So let's go to Keanai and Hana Maui with Scott Crawford.
Mahalo Makalea, and mahalo Andrea for hosting this this conversation. I wanted to start off the Kipahulu Ohana presentation with a video that was put together by some students from Hana High School with the support of Maui Huliau Foundation, and let them sort of introduce Kipahulu area, Kipahulu Moku, and the Kipahulu Ohana, and Uncle John and Auntie Tweety Lind. So we can, and then after that, we'll just have a few slides to share a little bit about our community-based subsistence fishing area efforts and how that ties in with our theme of indigenous wisdom and science and climate change. So go ahead and start the video.
Aloha, my name is Awali, and today we are here in the Moku of Kipahulu.
And I am Grace Aina. Kipahulu Moku is on the southeast side of Maui, about 10 miles southwest of Hana Town.
Aloha, I'm Malia Kuala'au. Kipahulu Moku is a remote district that extends from Pu'alu'u Stream in the northeast to Kalepa Stream in the southwest, and from Halakala Mountain to the sea.
And I am Tu'upua. Today we'll be talking more about the Kipahulu Ohana and how their Malama Ikekai program continues to perpetuate the Lawai'a Pono practices.
The Kipahulu Ohana was founded in 1995 by Uncle Mike Min, Uncle John Lind, and Auntie Tweety Lind. They are dedicated to the cultural sustainability of the Kipahulu Moku in East Maui. They envision families working together to preserve and enhance traditional cultural practices. They accomplish this through culturally based agriculture and resource management projects from Maukatu Makai.
Kipahulu Ohana's original project is Kapahu Living Farm, a traditional Hawaiian wetland taro farm, managed through a partnership agreement with Haleakala National Park. Ancient lo'i kalo have been restored, and other canoe plants like ulu and mai'a are also grown. Poi and other products are processed at their Kipahulu kitchen for distribution to the community. They also host educational programs for schools and community groups in the Lo'ikalo.
Aloha and good morning. My name is, they call me Auntie Tweety, and my husband's name is Uncle John. We are part caretakers of the Kapahu Living Farm in Kipahulu. So we have actually been here maybe almost 30 years. The goal here for Kipahulu has always been Mauka to Makai. I would like Uncle to maybe cover the science part of all that.
So what we found, the loi, get a lot to do with the life that comes from the ocean. And we find that a lot of the fishes, they come in, the moai hatch almost all the same time during the summer. And they come up, the eggs, the babies all come upstream. Even the opus come into the loi. And they go back down in. The freshwater that create the limu ele that the manini, all these fish feed on. So it's very important for the stream and the ocean. So and the OP get a lot to do with the freshwater. And almost all the sea life in the ocean, when you get big flash flood come down, that's what feed the ocean. For instance, right in front of the pools, we call one place Pepe Alepo. That's where all the rubbish come out of the river and they end up piles up in Pepe Alepo. It means like dirty water. That's always dirty all year long. Then that's all the food that for the moai, for all the fish and the shrimps. And this has been going on for years that we're trying to educate each other on that, yeah. So what we're doing is trying to protect the ocean and educate the people. The hardest one to educate is the state. And to get them come with us and learn the science of what we're doing. And they can help document it.
As a part of the Ahupua approach to resource management, Kipahulu Moku focuses on shoreline and nearshoreline stewardship. In 2012, they developed their Kipahulu Moku Malama Ikikai Community Action Plan, with input from fishermen, culture practitioners, scientists, and other community members. This plan proposed creating an Opihi rest area or a community subsistence fishing area or a Cbs Ffa in Kipahulu Moku.
The unsustainable harvest of the marine resources leads to decreased productivity and diversity. Hawaii's Cbs Ffa designation can be more effective than state-level management because they focus on local communities and protecting their natural resources. The Kipahulu Ohana believes that with Cbs Ffa's management, it can help reduce unsustainable fishing practices and allow fish populations to recover, thus leaving future generations with these marine resources.
Okay, mahalo to the OPIO and for putting that together, really nice. That's sort of a condensed version of a longer video that you can see on our website too. And we also have a video that goes into some details about the proposed rules and code of conduct within our proposed community-based subsistence fishing area. But I just wanted to highlight a few aspects of the Cbs Ffa. Go ahead and move forward a couple slides. The background of the Cbs Ffa. Started on Molokai in 1993 with a task force that found the importance of subsistence gathering within the economy and the diet of the people, and led to a sort of pilot project for the Cbs Ffa concept. And then that eventually led to the creation of the Cbs Ffa designation within the state legislature that provides an avenue for communities to be able to, and if you hold on one second, I'm having, because my screen is blurry, I can't read the slides, so I need to pull them up on my own computer here.
While he's getting those up, I think this is very important to really showcase how maybe in the past, Kanaka's voices were not heard while creating fisheries and MPAs. And so now really this model for Cbs Fas is really looking at what does the community want? What did the community observe to be the proper practices and pono practices? And how can we integrate that in policies now? So hopefully that took up some time, Scott, and you're ready to go.
Yes, thank you, Makalea. So go ahead and move to the next slide. So in 1994, the reliance of Molokai residents helped the legislature to, on the subsistence practices for their livelihood, helped the legislature to create the Cbs Ffa to reaffirm and protect traditional fishing practices for Native Hawaiian and establish the 2-year pilot project on the northwest coastline of Molokai. Go ahead to the next slide. So where we're at now is there is one Cbs Ffa that has currently been designated in Haena on Kauai in 2015. And there's several other communities that are in the process of that Chapter 91 rulemaking across the state, including Milili'i and Mo'omomi, along with Kipuhulu. And there's some other communities that are also in the early stages of Cbs Ffa planning. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Some highlights of the features of the Cbs Ffa and kind of what distinguishes it from other marine managed areas or fishery management areas is that it is place-based, community-driven, rooted in Indigenous science and observation based on generational knowledge and practice. And it protects traditional and customary practices for subsistence and Hawaiian cultural lifestyle. It's a state-recognized avenue for community groups to malama aina by proposing regulatory recommendations and management activities to sustain the health and abundance of the resources. So place-based means it's specific to the biology and the socioeconomic situation of the area where the Cbs Ffa is located. It's community-driven in that the proposal for the management plan and the rules comes from the bottom up and comes from the people of that place, and then working collaboratively for co-management in partnership with the state and with other agencies, but it really starts from the community. And it's rooted in Indigenous science and observation, so it really depends on the knowledge of the people of the place as the foundation for what the practices, what the appropriate practices and sustainable practices for that place are. And then it's the only designation for marine managed area in the state that specifically protects the customary practices and subsistence lifestyle, rather than just focusing on the biology and the sort of biomass of the fish themselves. It really is about the community and the people living in that place being able to continue their traditional practices that depend on those resources. So it's very important that, connection between, nature and culture. Go ahead and move to the next slide. This is the basic recommended rules that we're proposing for the Kipuhulu Moku, and just highlighting a couple examples of rules that are based on they're modern implementations of traditional resource management practices, or the kapu system. The time-based or place-based, as Uncle Mac was talking about in his video, the seasonal closures for spawning. We have also found in Kipahulu that the moi have, are spawning and reproducing outside of what is currently the closed season, which is June through August. So we're proposing to extend that from May through September. And maybe it will have to be even expanded beyond that based on the data that we see. But, that's an example of traditional management practices that's being applied in the modern setting. And then the other place-based is the idea of a pu'uhonua, or sanctuaries, or fish replenishment zones that Mo'omomi and Ha'ena and Milali'i are also looking at this as part of theirs. This is very important traditional practice, but also been shown through extensive research around the world, the importance of this in protecting areas and allowing areas to recover and rejuvenate. So we are proposing basically a sanctuary in a bay that has a lot of diversity within it. It represents different types of fish and different allows the fish to, the idea is, become abundant and within that area and then spill over into the surrounding areas and create greater abundance overall. Next slide. Tying this in a little bit to the question of climate change, our Cbs Ffa rules and management plan wasn't specifically done with to address climate change directly, but basically we feel like by being proactive in protecting the resources, we're helping to ensure that the ecosystem is healthy, that there's a diverse and abundant population, and that's the best way to enable it to be able to adapt to pressures and changes from climate change. We're also part of the effort that Uncle Mac talked about statewide to gather spawning data that may reflect climate-based changes and seasonal patterns. Uncle John talks a lot about traditionally there's this relationship between certain trees flowering at certain times and how that corresponds to certain fish reproduction cycles, and how we've been seeing a lot of changes over the last few years in like the trees fruiting and flowering at different times of the year, sometimes multiple times of the year. So you see these changes on land and in the ocean, how whether it's the temperatures changing or just different patterns of weather that are affecting those cycles. And everything that we do is really based on a foundation of Indigenous science, observation, and traditional knowledge and practice of the people who have generational connection with the place, and then integrating that with Western science to complement and support, and sort of, I think, like looking at, like we have two eyes gives us depth perception. I sort of think the more angles we have to look at something, the clearer we can see it and more. And so, if we just rely on Western science, we're really missing a big part of it. And we need to have that generational knowledge and the kilo practice and that research and development that Kamuela talked about that has been going on for generations and hundreds and thousands of years here. And so go ahead and move to the last slide. This just has our website there with information where you can learn more about our Cbs Ffa proposal, as well as our other projects and programs. And we also welcome feedback, so you can send comments to our email there. And with that, I'll wrap it up and happy to answer a question if you have anything, Makalea.
Mahalo, Scott. I love the bullet point that you put, Cbs Fas aren't necessarily like a specific solution that addresses climate change, but what we're talking about is holistic approaches to build towards resiliency, so that when climate, does put shocks and stressors on our system, we're able to adapt, we're able to be resilient as a community. And I think all of our projects really show that, it's about community cohesion is the indicator of how resilient a community is. If we're able to adapt and change when a crisis happens, that really shows that we're resilient as a community, that we can thrive. And so mahalo for putting that up, that, these are all maybe singular BMPs that we can support, but it's the holistic approach. It's not just the one lo'i in the stream, but it's creating a system so that people can get back to the land and create a system and a network of lo'i that will be the answer, that will create many sediment retention basins that would stop sediment from going to the ocean, but also create jobs, have food for our community, on and on. And there's all of these other multiple benefits that, your organization advocates for. And definitely the Mauka to Makai connection is. Yeah,
there really are so many communities all around the islands doing this kind of work in many different ways. And it's really empowering to be part of the network, and feel like each of us aren't in this alone, that the solutions are coming on so many different levels. And the only way we're going to solve it is, each area in their own community taking their kuleana and moving forward with it, and then working together.
Absolutely. So let's jump to Moku Kiave with Auntie Hannah. She's kama'aina of Ka'upulehu in North Kona, and hopefully she'll talk about her project. I'm really looking forward to seeing her advocacy and community cohesion that she's really brought together the people of Kona. So Auntie Springer.
Hui vili na mai nei. I appreciate the extended time, so it's not quite so much like a fire hose. But I'm going to share my mo'olelo, which is a traditional history and a current sensibility. Next slide, please. I'm Hannah Kihalani Springer, a kama'aina of Ka'upulehu and Kuki'o, both of which are privately owned. Ka'upulehu by the Kamehameha Schools, and Kuki'o, formerly part of Hu'ehu'e Ranch, is a high-end housing development. I am also a member of the unincorporated Ka'upulehu Marine Life Advisory Committee, which I'll refer to as the KMLAC, which was established over 20 years ago as a condition of settlement on an intervention on an Army Corps of Engineers permit, where we argued that a certain moi hole, remember moi from Uncle Mac, limu beds, and kupe'e nests should be analyzed using National Historic Preservation Act criteria. Now, the biological communities did not rise to merit protection under the Act, but the precedent was set for biological communities to be considered as historic resources because of the relationships between the two-legged mea, the finned mea, the mea limu, and the mea kupe'e. The KMLAC is comprised of the parties to the intervention: the landowner, the developer, and the interveners, the Kona Hawaiian Civic Club and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And we did use the 1994 report that Scott referred to. We studied it with great interest because that was the time, the season of our intervention. The kūpuna among us serve as tiebreakers if needed, and family members, Division of Aquatic Resources, DoCare personnel, scientists, students, researchers, and various interested parties join in engaging, progressive, safe, and solution-forward conversations. As we look at this slide, from left to right, as we look at the screen, in other words, from north to south, are the waters of our tri-weight 10-year rest area proposed by the KMLAC, which will be discussed later on in the slideshow. Again, from left to right, the first bay that we see is Kahuwai Bay at Ka'upulehu, where my father's people were at the time of the capture of the Fair American, but we won't go down that bunny hole. Next is Uluweuweu Bay at Kūkiʻo, where my mother's people were at the same time. Hualalai is our mauna, heavenly and subterranean waters, and basil springs along the shore are our vai. From shoal to summit, we study and share. We have been fishermen and farmers, chiefs and cowboys. We now work in education and resources management and in the hospitality and volunteer sectors. We continue to live and find accomplishment where we have been for centuries. Next slide, please. This is a Herb Kawainui Kane painting of Kamehameha and Pele. Pele has just covered our famous fish pond named Pa'aiea. It perfectly depicts our belief in dynamic, interactive relationships between creation and created, between mundane and sublime, between phenomenal and political. We see the life-changing destruction of creation from one generation to the next, whether the change comes from the land, the sea, the heavens, or from among human beings ourselves. Next slide, please. No valleys here. Our homeland is called Kekaha vai ole. Kekaha, the place, vai, water, and ole, without. So, a rainbow upon a dry land is a marvel. We live on a dry land, and me and my house still live on water catchment. And by the way, we all do. We just don't all realize it. But I digress. We see the signs of interaction in quiet moments, a rainbow in a clear sky, a drought through a wet season. We are never apart from the elements. The lava, the tide, the rain, and the sun people are our people, and our people have taught us to live within our means and to find contentment therein. Next slide, please. This is Kaikalaia Church at Makalavena. From the ancient gods to the time of the new word, we believe in dynamic, interactive relationships between creator and created, from one generation to the next. Now, the practice of devotion does not necessarily beg a theological debate. Among some of us, it may strengthen the practice of respect among each other, ikekahi, ikekahi. Next slide, please. This is the kauhale of Mahiko and Kahiko at the back of Kahuwai Bay, where the Kona Village Resort was and will be again, and which will always be known as the home of the Ohana Keakealani, He Noa no la ko. When the economies changed from subsistence to surplus and from surplus to capital, and our livelihoods with them, we made the adjustments and have been blessed to stay home still. Next slide, please. We know the people who lived here when the Opai'ula were a linchpin for the Opelu fishery. They have passed, and we are assuming their niche in our ecosystem, teaching how it is to live where the land is the media and the media is the message. And the message is to live interactively and responsively and respectfully with our environment, rather than antagonistically reacting to its movements and cycles with fear and hostility. The Kaumanu Highway was built when I was in my mid-20s, and Uncle Joe Maka'ai was 20 years younger than he is in this picture. I knew firsthand my eyes upon the reef, the plentitude that declined exponentially as an unintended consequence of the easy access that followed the opening of the highway. Next slide, please. In 2015, the KMLAC, with the help of the Nature Conservancy Hawaii, prepared a conservation action plan in anticipation of going before the Board of Land and Natural Resources with our proposal for a 10-year all-species rest from the shoreline out to a depth of 120 feet across the ahupua of Ka'upulehu and Kūkiʻo. As complementary to the community-based subsistence fishing area legislation, ours was an administrative rule change, which took place before the Board of Land and Natural Resources. Our intention being to rest the area, allow for marine resources recovery, and partner with the state of Hawaii to manage our home fisheries from a basis of abundance rather than depletion. What we want to Mālama, to conserve, sustain, and regenerate and care for, to serve, are mo'olelo, our histories, past and current, told from the lips of one to the ears of the next, generation to generation, person to person. Wai, fresh water, waiopai, anchoring pools which support opai ula. The waiakane, which is a wahipana, where the vai is the mo'olelo. Pa'akai, the fluid sea. Kai, made firm, pa'a, the salt we collect there. Marine food resources and the ono associated with them. Sad to say that even among Kanaka kids, many would rather eat a frozen mahi plate than a fresh u'u or kole off of the reef. The intertidal ecosystems, the coral reef ecosystems, ko'a, and fishing aggregations that are kūpuna, knew by name. And ma'ano, one of our families, have a lineal kuleana to ma'alama them. Next slide, please. The water cycle graphics demonstrate that ours is a multimedia mo'olelo. Next slide, please. The mo'olelo of waiapai and waiopai and waikai as told graphically and in the native drone. Similar technology shows us the models that indicate where the waiopai yet to be will be, and which will perhaps be guppy and mosquito fish free, at least to begin with. Next slide, please. The waiakane in its present context, where the mo'olelo and the vai still hold our attention. Next slide, please. The pa'akai, the salt of Kalaimano, and the waters of Waikulukulu, a certain cave, Kianakulukulu, a certain cave near to Ahuaumi, are the intersection of ceremony and governance. We do not have time right now, but look up Kapa'akayo Ka'aina for more information on another legal intervention from Ka'upulehu that has affected the treatment of cultural resources in Hawaii Nei, statewide across the Paiaina. Next slide, please. Here's how we keep track. Intertidal monitoring, checking the bioindicators. Is the limu ele present or not? If not, where's the vai? We kilo, always. Next slide, please. Fish and benthic monitoring, checking the bioindicators. Is there coral bleaching in association with warmer ocean water temperatures? Or are particular specimens of particular species regaining color with cooler ocean water temperatures? We kilo everywhere, and we're always looking for the ho'omana. Next slide, please. And I put this in just because it's so pretty. And we can kilo from the privacy of our home screens. Check it out, the mu. And look for that second he'e. Aloha no that we live Hawaii. Next slide, please. Look at all the peva e kamuela. Try wait. In 2015 and 2016, a collective of Kama'aina, researchers, government agents, and Kanaka, civic engagement enthusiasts ka-ko, from across the Paiaina gathered to support that 10-year rest period, which we affectionately call try wait. We are not saying try stop fishing here forever. We are saying try wait, try let it rest. Then we go, akua willing, more wisely than we went before. Next slide, please. Roy roundups, invasive fish captures, are opportunities to engage with, chat with, educate skeptics and fans alike. Next slide, please. In 2018, we began fisheries management planning. Using FishPath, we are applying a commercial fisheries management technique refined by our native intelligence to our so-called recreational, we prefer to say subsistence fishery, and we're almost planning and starting to write it. Next slide, please. Here we are, public, private, professional, volunteer, kama'aina, and malihini folks. We intend that Ka'upulehu and Kūki'o, ancestral homes to some of us, and Aina, cherished by all of us, will be a place where the sea is cared for, productive, and welcoming. Next slide, please. We've been living this intention for generations. My mom took the picture of her sisters, her mother, and her grandfather at Kūki'o in the 1930s. The umeke is deep. Next slide, please. And the umeke is beautiful. The life is beautiful. And the savoring of it and sharing the ono from umeke to umeke is part of the solution. Last slide, please. Mahalo nui. Whoopao.
Mahalo, Auntie Hannah. So we have, we're just a little bit over time, but I really did want to acknowledge a couple of people in the audience that had some questions. And we have Council Member Villegas in the audience, as well as, and she's a council member from your side of the island. And Emily Choi had put in a question that I think pertains to, government and regulation and how your organization was formed. I think I heard that it was kind of an impetus from Army Corps action that you guys came together. So Emily Choi's question was, the ultimate goal being that that we want to integrate Indigenous thinking into the early stages of planning and policy making. And so she was asking, apart from attending events like these, what are concrete ways which the federal staffers like herself can approach Indigenous knowledge holders? And what advice do you have in forming and maintaining respectful and long-lasting relationships when we are separated by distance and time? So this is to you, Auntie Hannah, but of course, everybody, this is a question we can all answer and probably can talk for many more hours about of how to do this. But yes, Auntie Hannah.
Okay, we're going to go down the bunny hole of irony, okay? Now, there was a certain intervention at Koanaiki in Kona, where interveners came forward as part of the county level of permit approvals. One of the messages that came across to the community was that you need to become engaged as early on as possible. Now down the coastline at Kekaha, at Ka'upulehu, we heard this loud and clear. So at Ka'upulehu, when the landowner and developer came forward to reclassify 1,000 acres of conservation land into the urban designation, in alphabetical, not political order, Kahuwai Hawaii, the Kona Hawaiian Civic Club, and Protect Koanaiki Ohana, aloha Rebecca, came forward to intervene on the action. One of the first things we were told was, oh, you're too early. You don't need to be here now. You can wait and come in when we're approving the particulars of the development as before the county. We said, no, thank you very much. We're going to stay. We were gifted the name Kapa'akaioka by Mama Kahulenala Teves, Manaleo, a native speaker of Hawaiian, because the point of intervention for us was the pa'akai. We were concerned that although having been interviewed for the environmental impact statement, there was no reference to the gathering of kapa'akai as being a current practice. It was said in the EIS that this was a practice that had not occurred for a very long time. So we intervened. Mind you, at that time, the State Historic Preservation Division did not have rules. Their testimony into the system were constituted guidelines. So I'm going on, but what I'm trying to do is point out the weaknesses of the system that are not revealed unless we intervene. So having intervened, the decision is called Kapa'akaioka Aina, and look it up, it's a good read. You may recall from my comments, I said that we have created a safe place for conversations to occur. Everybody is welcome. Many of you on this Zoom have been there, and not just the panelists. So I think creating safe places for conversations to occur is the most important thing. When the government agency, whatever agency it is the host, make sure that it is a safe place. As Pomaikai was discussing earlier, not just come look at our slideshows and listen to our quaint mo'olelo, but understand that there's deep intelligence and aloha encoded in those mo'olelo, from our lips to your ears. Mahalo.
Beautiful, absolutely. And I think that, translates to many different activities that government and our society wants to move into, especially if we're talking about climate change and renewable energy. Where are we citing those renewable energy projects? When are we having those conversations? Are we, like you said, making us wait till the public comment period that gets posted on a board and then you have 45 days to find it and then respond? But have those conversations now and respect Indigenous places and people while we're planning those things ahead of time. So is there any other input from the panelists before we sign off? I think, Moika'i, you're ready. I see you.
Yeah. Mama ke wau mahalo nui ana ke hena no kona vehe ana. And when you have that kind of sharing, ua hei ia ke la ike apa ia kako. But the question to how do you seek out this knowledge? We always say he la la vau no ku'ukumu. That I am a branch of the trunk of the tree of where I gain my knowledge. It exists. Find somebody. Go to a halau. Go to a kumuhula. Find a cultural practitioner. They're out there. They're not hard to find. They're readily accessible. I don't think we all are at conferences. That you just attend conferences and gain these pearls of wisdom. I think we got to search them out on every island, in every moku. If you ask somebody, hey, who's a person who is well respected in culture here? In every district, somebody say, oh, Molokai, go see Uncle Mac if you want to know about fishing. Oh, you want a paniola, go see Uncle Jimmy Duvish, or our Hopic over there. But every moku has these people. The key to it is when they share with you, you ho'olohe. Yeah. This is not a book off the shelf where you go over there. Oh, let me go ask Auntie Hannah, what's your manao? Hey, you know what? I'll go do something my own. Anyhow, let me see. The application for us, the kuleana, is when kūpuna, and you just heard her say too, from our lips to your ears, but when it is released from her lips to your ears and hits your na'au, you now carry that kuleana to implement it and get it done too. And so it's a very, very good question. I really want to share today that if you don't really know, just ask Makalea. She can probably give you 400 contacts on every island in a particular aupa. And if she doesn't, it'll be a lead to somebody like Pauleke, you know, and just wanted to share that.
I'll just ask Pauleke.
I want to also jump in really quickly too. I want to mahalo Pauleke and Auntie, and I think what Emily's asking is an important question. Especially for allies, it's important to understand what allyship looks like, and especially from peers that are working on the continent. A lot of the decision making and the things that have to happen, decisions that play out in Hawaii come from continental sources. And I think, you know, I spent some time working at that level, and there's always the junket issue that, oh, Hawaii is a paradise and all these other things. The Hawaii Visitors Bureau over the years has promoted this idea of Hawaii not having problems. And it's really hard to be taken seriously at these national conversations without allies who can understand the root of what we're trying to say and translate it. So we're able to be able to receive the resources necessary to restore our agency. I think it's also really important for community organizations to understand how to receive allies, to really use the word of the kanaka ole ohana, like the kapu and the kanawai, like what are the rules of engagement and how do you, what are the rules and expectations of behavior to enter, and how you're going to behave. And that graphic we showed of the lo'ikalo and its ability to identify what are all of the billable services. Because we set the way for students to enter, that was designed by a Kanaka and not even a Kama'aina, someone who wasn't even from Hawaii, but they worked together to create a blueprint on how you can invest. And I think having the ability, I think speaking to the need for us to have allies at the national level and international, however your political leanings are, because it helps us to be at the table where decisions are being made that impact us. And we have to be able to be prepared to be there to speak their language. So I think that is a really good question. And I'm really eager to be part of future dialogues to help with that bridging so that we can be in those spaces comfortable in our own skin and cultivating the ability to think in Hawaiian and speak in English and choose the right terms so that we're getting resourced accordingly. At the end of the day, I think it's important that Indigenous people be at the table because of exhibited excellence, not because people feel guilty. And I think that's kind of spaces where we need to be at the table at in DC, because so much of that is coming downstream, or at NSF panels or so forth. So I really appreciate the question. I see it as a call to action as much as maybe something that's really clearly articulated yet. And mahalo for allowing me to be on the panel. Mahalo to everyone speaking. Yo.
And just to echo,
can I just mention, you know, a great initiative out of Kamehameha schools, mahalo anake ekela, with Kanaio Kana. There's, you know, COVID happened and just all of this was more accessible to us through Kanaio Kana. You know, you have shows like Leia Nue Nue, all of the different initiatives and social media to be connected closer to a practitioner. So I just put in the chat the link to that, so you can kind of tap into that, see what people are doing out there and making themselves available to the dialogue and the discussion.
Mahalo for that.
Hallelujah.
Yes, and I just wanted to echo Kamuela, his sentiment about, you know, putting Indigenous people in places of power and management. And we finally have an Indigenous person that's heading the Department of the Interior. Finally, like, why did that take so long? But to be able to say, not just as a consultant, I'm just going to go and, you know, talk to Indigenous people and get their input, but really like put them in power positions and let us manage our resources. And so I know we have to head off. Pauleke is ready to do our closing, but I just wanted to share one screen about how we can really integrate traditional practices into policy and planning. So how do you guys, if there's planners out there, how do we, I can't share my screen, but there's a paper that was written by John Ching. It was his thesis in, I think, whatever major you majored in, Kamuela, about how to integrate Ahupua'a system into planning. So looking at where did we traditionally place our resources? You know, where do we build our hale? Where do we have our agriculture practices? And sticking to those commitments in zoning and policy and planning, keeping that, you know, we didn't develop in wetlands, don't develop in wetlands now. I mean, we did, Kihei was 1,000 acres of wetlands. Now we have six acres maybe, but stop the bleed now and take action now. Don't just continue this endless cycle. So Pauleke is going to close us out with Ahia Kawaya Kane, I think.
And I'm just going to say a couple of mahalos because I'm just totally blown away by this conversation. And so I want to say mahalo nui loa to Makalea, Alana, Kamuela, Pauleke, Pomekai, Kehau, Scott, and Auntie Hannah for sharing your incredible mana'o and work and helping to create this special presentation today. And do stay with us for a moment. Pauleke will close us out, as Makalea said. Before he begins, I just want to share a reminder to visit the resource section on the event webpage beginning next week to find out how you can support the organizations you heard from today. If you would like to support Historic Hawaii Foundation and our work, you can go to historichawaii.org. There's a join us button, and then you can also sign up for our e-newsletter. Mostly, I feel so grateful for being able to be part of this. And I hope that for the people out there that it inspired and informed and will be a catalyst for additional conversations and on culture, Indigenous knowledge, and climate. I'd also like to thank my colleague, Michelle Kisek, who's been providing technical and other support for this event. And so with that, Pauleke, please lead us in closing the space. Thank you so much.
Mahalo everybody, mahalo kako. Sharing and closing this oli with you guys. All the Aina and Honua warriors out there, blessing with our vai, our life-giving waters that we recognize here in Hawaii, all around you, out the internet to the world. So yeah, going along with us with the vai that gives us life, strength, mana. Yeah, aloha. Hey, we, hey, Nino, hey, we are going now, ya, oi, ai, ya, koi, ya, kane, ai, kai, kina, kalapu, kai, ai, lela, koi, ya, kane, hey, we are going now, ya, oi, ai, ya, koi, ya, kane, ai, kaulana, kalapu, kapai, opu, ke, kai, ya, mai, ana, mani, ho, makamole, mai, ole, hui, ai, lela, koi, ya, kane, e ui a kua nao ia oi ai hea kua ia kane. Ai ke kua hiwi, ke kua lono i ke awawa i ke kawai. Ai leila kua ia kane. E ui a kua nao ia oi ai hea kua ia kane. Ai kai ka moana i ke kua lau i kūpuna kia nui nui. Ka ukoko i ka lewa lewa. Ai leila kua ia kane. E ui a kua nao ia oi ai hea kua ia kane. Ai luna kua ia kane. I ke au uli, ke au ele ele, ke au pano pano, ke au popolo o mea kane. La e, ai lela kua ia kane. E ui a kua nao ia oi. E ui a kua nao ia oi ai hea kua ia kane. Ai lalo I ka honua I ka waihu I ka wai kaua kane me kana loi. E wai puna, e wai inu, e wai mana, e wai ola, e ola no e. Ola ka wai aka. Aloha.
Hola. Mahalo, Pauleke. Thank you, everybody.
Mahalo.
Mahalo,
Thank you. Mahalo. Bye, everyone.
Hey, aloha. Malamola.